Good morning, or afternoon, or evening, or whatever the time zone is wherever you happen to live. My name is Mariah, and I will be your hostess for this project. Today we are serving up a wholesome meal of basic sewing, using only the finest of natural linens, and sewn with classic techniques on a 1921 Singer, my first full project on the new/old machine. Our meal will finish off with a light dessert of seeing simple homemade clothing in action in the wilderness of Missouri. I hope you all enjoy. Okay, but for real, I was in a gut rush to finish the Norse capsule wardrobe video before I went to Missouri, and then I decided to make shoes, and then I also decided to try and finish a pair of shorts to wear on the trip. So it was kind of a simple, quick little project, but I think it'll still be fun to go over. There's kind of a trend going on amongst the historical costuming community of like revisiting and re-falling in love with natural fibers and linen specifically. And it is true, it's a very underappreciated fiber in modern society. Okay, pretty much anyone I've ever heard that actually knew what linen was is older generations, and they tend to just be like, oh, you need to iron that, don't buy linen. Which, you know, of course you do, but like, linen. It's beautiful. So I could say that the reason I wanted to show you how to make your own sports shorts is for environmental or humanitarian reasons, and those are both valid, but the truth is I've actually been low-key lusting after a pair of shorts like this since like 2014 when it came across my Pinterest feed, and it came originally from the blog Unfancy, where there was a pair of gray sports shorts made out of linen that were originally from Madewell. So there's no creative design here, I'm basically just making those. And for a pattern I'm going to be using a pair of sports shorts that I already own that fit me, and I'm going to do my best to show you how I drafted a pattern based off of those. But a lot of it was experimental and feeling it out and just trying to see what worked. It's not like simple plugging in of math. If you want to try and make a pattern like that, you pretty much just have to experiment. So let's get started. Okay, I started out by taking some scrap fabric left over from another mock-up and just trying to smooth it out and flatten it across one panel of the shorts as well as I could. This was kind of difficult because they're short, so you can't just lay them flat because they're kind of meant to be interlocking 3D pieces. So the only real guideline I have is that I did try to make sure that I lined up the straight of grain with the side and top of the pants, because that would be most likely to be straight of grain, and then I just let the hemline and then the crotch area kind of fall in place where they would. And then for the top edge, I had to basically start with the straight side corner and then stretch it out to figure out how wide I needed to make the top edge to allow for elastic. So once I had it pinned down pretty solidly, I took a marker and traced around all of the edges. I didn't really account for seam allowance here, I just made notes of where I would have to add seam allowance later. Once I traced around the entire panel, I could unpin the fabric. Then I traced the side back panel because originally I was planning on sewing them pretty much exactly like the original pair and sewing in the side back panel as a separate piece. And then I traced the back panel, which I didn't get on film, but again it was the most difficult only because the crotch stretches so far around, it's hard to flatten your fabric well enough for that. Then I took those pieces and I traced them out onto paper. In here I basically had to kind of eyeball it to just kind of smooth out edges that I think I might not have traced completely perfectly. And again, I know it's not a perfect matchup to the original pattern pieces because you really can't do that once something has been sewn into a 3D object and then worn. The fabric just kind of warps, so you're never going to be able to get a perfect match. But the good news is you don't need a perfect match. If you can get it close enough and then you can do some mock-ups and kind of fine-tune it, you can come up with good results. It doesn't have to be an exact perfect clone of the pattern. And then I added seam allowance back in where it needed it, and 2 inches of extra allowance along the top edge for the waistband. Here I also decided that I really did want to go ahead and join that side panel with the back panel and just make it all one piece. And the only real reason I went with this is because I didn't have a third fabric option on hand that I thought would work with the color scheme. Okay, so this is what I have right now, and I think they're pretty good, but I'm probably going to add some width to the pattern pieces. If I can add a little bit to the length of the waist, I might be able to make them high-waisted. And then in the back, they slope down quite a bit. So I'm definitely going to add a lot more to the waist length of the back. Okay, mock-up number 2, and it is much, much better. It is pretty much sitting perfectly at the high waist where I wanted it. I'm just going to work on this little portion of it a bit more, and then I think the pattern is pretty much good to go. Then it was finally time to cut out the real shorts. And for materials, I have this textured gray linen. For the binding, I'm going to make bias tape from this natural linen. The drawstring will be this 1/4 inch wide linen tape. For threads, I have a 100% linen thread that I will be using for any hand stitching, and then I have a poly cotton blended thread that I'm going to be using in the machine. Okay, so the first few steps are done, and they consisted of sewing the short inseam of the pant legs and then the crotch seam as French seams. However, I got a little bit mixed up and my inseam ended up on the outside, so rather than seam ripping the crotch seam, I decided that the best way to fix it was to add some blue jean top stitching and try and cover it up that way. And then for the next stage, I need to bind the outseams and the hems with my bias tape. Okay, so it is late, but I'm going to try and do one more thing. Originally, I was going to seam these at the side like the original shorts were done, but I don't think that is the best strategy because linen is slightly thicker than that thin nylon. So I'm going to seam rip this away a little bit, splice it onto the rest of my bias tape, and then finish it off. And then on this other side, I'm going to go all the way down and around. And then I was planning on machine stitching the other side of it down, and then I decided to hand sew it because I don't have a good answer for that. Alright, that is all done and pinned in place, and I will get to hand stitching it tomorrow. And I think I figured out my justification for that. It will look nicer if I hand stitch it. Okay, now it was time to join the outside seams of the pant legs, and I decided to do that by just lapping the edges over each other. I used my seam gauge to evenly space them, and then on each side I measured 10 inches from the top of the waistband down to where I wanted the split to begin. To sew it, I stitched along just the edge of the exposed bias tape, and then at the base of the split, to reinforce it, I made a few horizontal rows of stitches. Then the pants were pretty much down to the whole waistband. First I eyeballed and ironed over about 1/4 of an inch, and then to make the casing I measured and ironed over that edge again, this time at 1 3/4 inches. I pinned that edge down as I ironed, but before I could sew it, I needed to put in the eyelets. So when I made my 18th century stays, that was the first time I really used hand-sewn eyelets, and I was shocked that they were actually strong. Plus, hand-stitched eyelets just look so beautiful. I'm definitely gonna hand-stitch these. First, I decided that I should probably reinforce the area of the waistband where the eyelets would go, so I cut a small piece from some of the scrap linen and folded it to make more layers. I lined that up inside the waistband where the eyelets would go and pinned it in place. And then I used an awl to make 2 holes. I do definitely prefer awls over hole punches because with hole punches, you're actually punching through the fibers and it's overall going to compromise and weaken the fabric. But with an awl, it's just spreading the fibers apart to make a hole. Then I used some waxed linen thread and just stitched all the way around those eyelets until they looked pretty secure. And now the waistband was ready to stitch down. I stitched all around it, just leaving an opening so that I could put through the elastic. I spliced together 2 remnants of elastic that I've had in my stash, and then I drew it all the way through the opening I left in the waistband. And then I stitched the ends of the elastic together. Once that was done, I could finish off the opening, and then since I can't back tack, I pulled the threads through to the back side and tied them together. Now this would have been an okay place to stop, but there is one more detail I want to add that I think really ups the professionalism, and that is the extra lines of stitching along the elastic of the waistband. And the only impractical thing about this is if you ever had to alter or replace the elastic, it would be 10 times more difficult, but that's very unusual to happen, so I think that it's worthwhile because it actually has function in that it keeps the gathers from shifting, it keeps them all nice and neat where you originally set them. It also keeps the elastic in place because sometimes you can have elastic get warped or twisted on the inside of the waistband and it prevents that from happening. So in order to do this, I had to adjust the gathers to where I wanted them in the waistband and pin them down. I would say that stitching them is a little bit difficult for a beginner. I've had students try it a few times. What makes it difficult is that typically when you're sewing, the feed dogs underneath the machine are passing the fabric through at the exact rate it needs to go. When you are stretching out the elastic, you have to be the one to guide it, so you really need to know the machine. What can happen if you pull it too far or not enough is that you can snap needles. I feel like it's worthwhile to learn, and it's not difficult for anyone that's got even intermediate skills, but just for a very beginner, it's not the easiest thing in the world. So once I had those channels done, the only thing left to do was insert the drawstring. And to come up with the drawstring length, I measured it around my hip to make sure that when the waistband was stretched out, it wouldn't go too far and suck the drawstring back inside. Inserting the drawstring through the eyelets took a couple of tries to figure out the right thing to use. I could have left an opening somewhere to insert a safety pin, but I actually have this cool needle. I think it came from a leather working kit. It's just a thick, hollow needle with like screw treads on the inside so that you can twist leather into it. In this case, it worked out pretty well for the linen cord. I just had to twist it a lot further than usual because the linen didn't have quite the gripping power of a leather cord. But I used that to insert the drawstring. And then I was thinking about sewing the ends of the drawstring, but I decided to just tie them and then finish them off with fray check. And they are done. There's just one fit issue I would like to address before I forget. When I was adding length to the waistline in order to raise it, I added 1 inch along the whole front panel just smoothly across, but then I sloped it up at the back. That's perfect at the back, but at the front, there was just a little bit excess, and I think I really should have just continued that slope down. So what I did is I altered that on my pattern in case I ever want to make these again, but I just wanted to show you what that looks like, is there's just a little bit of bubbling, a little bit of excess fabric kind of gathering up right at the front crotch area, but overall, like, it's fine. It's not gonna bother me too much, but it's just the little details to try and improve ourselves. And with that, they are done, and I was going to get a lot of footage on the trip of myself wearing them, but then it turned out that I took all kinds of cool like river footage and almost nothing with myself in it, so that didn't really work out right. So I'll show you some clips of just wearing it here, but I think I'm going to save most of my river footage for a world building Nauticon video that I'm working on. So yeah, subscribe for more content. This was a fun little project. I've got some more fun little projects that I'm trying to get through footage of. I think the next capsule wardrobe video, when I get around to it, is going to be 18th century. I was going to do Outlander, but I think I want to just do 18th century first because I've got some ideas for how that could work. And I want to kind of play them out before I do a specifically Outlander inspired one. And then I'm working on a world building video as well. This one is going to be just kind of a general world overview history for the Nautican race. So that's going to be fun too. So subscribe and stick around.